Before we begin today's episode, we want to inform you, the viewer, that today's episode has topics that are of a sensitive nature. Please use your own discretion before watching this episode and feel free to skip to the next one. Your well-being is our top priority.
Anger actually fuels shame, because anger many times is a defense mechanism for how you feel inside.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to let people in. You feel vulnerable, and what do? You lash out. And that's what I was doing. I was just lashing out. And I had to now take all those walls down, all the ways that I was feeling like lashing out and saying, God, I allow you to heal my heart. And when he started doing that, all of a sudden my identity, I started to see who I really was in God. And it brought so much joy, so much happiness, so much peace. People saw a shift in me, man, where they were like, Ken was always angry. Now I'm like joking around. Now I'm laughing. Now I'm like smiling. And they're like, who is this guy? Right? Like, what happened to the angry, like I was cussing out a storm just if you just nudged me.
Yeah.
Bro, like I weighed 130, 5'7", you know, I'm like, I was like a chihuahua. Like, I'm like yelling at people and they're like, who is this, kid? And it's just like, God redeemed me, man. Most guys walking around right now, they don't feel fully known. So they have to have these masks on, these personas on of like, oh yeah, I'm this type of guy. I act this certain way. Like, no, man, you're a hurt little boy. Admit it. It's okay. But guess what? God can make you strong, right? But his strength is going to look very different in your life than what our society tells you. And that's what I'm always preaching to guys. Like, look, meekness is power under control. God is going to make you a humble man, but he's also going to make you a dangerous man when you fall in line in obedience to what he's asked you to. Right? And the way to do that is not to like say, hey, I'm going to hide my sin. It's no, I'm going to reveal my sin to the right people, first to God, then to other people that you can trust. And when you start to do that, man, God just reveals so many beautiful things about his grace, his mercy to you.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Valley of the Heroic podcast. I am here with my good friend, Ken. This is somebody that I was able to meet online. So for those of you who are struggling to make friends, there is an opportunity. Listen, this is a guy that I just got to meet online. We got to talking, and we have a lot of shared similarities, a lot of things that we enjoy. And the key point being that we were able to be authentic with each other and able to just be ourselves in front of one another. And we connected very quickly. And I know that Ken is going to have an amazing story that is going to bless some of your lives. So Ken, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, man. I was able to be on your podcast, and now you are here on the Valley of the Heroic podcast. So welcome. Can you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and who you are, what you're passionate about, what you do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I am the host of the Shameless podcast with Ken Freire, and I've been doing that now for quite a bit of months, since July, October. And I love it. I love getting men like yourself, other men who have overcome shame. And the goal of that podcast is to kill shame, stand strong, and be on mission, specifically for Christian men who are just struggling with either porn addiction or abuse. And they're just like, how do I overcome what has happened to me and walk into what God has called me to? Sometimes it's really hard to see that. And the reason I love talking about that is because I never saw myself where I am today, where I think the biggest beauties that I have in my life is my wife of over 13 years now, and I have 4 wonderful kids. But if you would have, talked to me 15 years ago, I never would have imagined that would have been my life. My life was actually in a place of despair. I was a very angry individual. I was very frustrated. And Eric, you met the good Ken, right? We were joking around. We're always texting each other, like just goofing around now. But like, I was just such an angry individual. And I honestly, I hated life.
Wow.
Many times where I contemplated to end my life and stuff like that. So long story short, I know we're going to dive into it, but I came out of that by God's grace. And I am here where I am today because of what God has done in my life. Because he healed me, I was able to now see the future of what I'm capable of only through what God has empowered me to do.
Bro, that's already so powerful. And like, we're
2 minutes in,
45 seconds in, because like, I think that what I really want to highlight about what you said that really stood out to me is the fact that you are in a place right now that you would have never imagined yourself being in. And that speaks to the power of God transforming us in ways that we could not even ever imagine. Now as a family man, as a father, as a husband, you're living the life that God intended you to live. And that's a beautiful thing. And many times the very reason for which we can't see us being able to step into that is because of ourselves. Like the first thing you pointed at wasn't, well, I didn't have resources, or, I don't think I could have got here because of whatever other external thing. You pointed at yourself. You said, I was so angry. I was full of shame. I was doing this. I was doing that. And how many times we're going through things and we're not able to see in the future because there's so much pain that's a veil over our eyes. That is so powerful, bro. And I'm so excited to kind of jump into your story. I got to tell you, the biggest thing that I enjoy about the platform that you're building right now with Shameless is just the fact that we're speaking to shame, which I think is a huge component, a huge piece of why people act out.
100%.
Act out of character, act out of the person that they could potentially be, right? Potential is just potential, right? That's all it is. It's potential. It's not who you actually are. You just have the potential to be that, both negatively and positively. And I think that a lot of times we live out the negativity in our lives, the negative potential. We live in that because of shame. And shame is such a powerful thing. So I'd love to hear for you, like some of the foundational things that kind of both created that shame that was inside of you and also led to the victorious moment now where you're able to speak to men about how to live outside of that shame.
Yeah. Let's start with how the milestones of how shame started happening into my life, because I think a lot of men will be able to speak to it at some point in my journey, right? Maybe not everything, but in some points. And before we begin, my story in some ways can be triggering for certain individuals. So I'll say that. So as you're listening to this, I will get to certain places where you may be like, oh my gosh, I need to turn this off. Like it's causing certain negative emotions. I get that. Pause it, right? And maybe come back to it. I will tell you there is hope for the future as I'm going into this conversation. Know that if you got to fast forward to the end of it, totally do that. But I share this because what I have found, Eric, is that most men, we have so many struggles that we go through, but we feel like we're alone in those struggles, right? And it could be just addiction, right? It could be abuse. That those are the two things that we're going to talk about today. But there's other things that us as men, we feel like we have to have the weight of all the pressures on our shoulders and we don't have other people to go through.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of how my story started. You know, I was born and raised in New York City. I had a very large family that I was a part of. And I remember all these fun moments, right? Where it was like me and like my cousins were all hanging out. Here's a little fun story for you. I remember I used to live on the second floor of a New York City house, and we were broke kids, right? Like we were broke families. My cousins and I, we would jump in this refrigerator box because my dad used to like sell furniture and like appliances and put pillows in it and literally just push that big box from the second floor down to the first floor.
Whoa.
Dude,
that's insane.
Dumbest thing.
New York, though.
In New York. Now looking back on it, it's like the dumbest thing we could have done. But we're like, oh, we just wanted our own roller coaster because we couldn't afford our own, you know, like to go out and do those things. So we would play in the back alleys like that. That was just my life. That's what I remember doing as a child. Well, all those were fun memories. I remember, though, my life being plagued a lot, not by those things, but by sexual abuse. And at the age of 3, I remember from like about 3 to 5 that I was sexually abused on numerous occasions. And that had scarred me for the rest of my life. Fast forward, I repressed a lot of those memories, you know, and I just couldn't handle it. You know, when you're that young, you don't know what to do with those things. But around 5, the same individual who had abused us also started to introduce pornography into my life. And, you know, you and I came from those same, age gap, right? Where Saturday morning cartoons was like our jam. And you and I talked about that, right? Where it's like every Saturday, the WB, whatever it is, Cartoon Network, like we'd watch those things. That same way that I was watching cartoons at the age of 5 was the way that I slowly started watching pornography.
Insane.
So it like skewed my view of women, of sexual morality, of God in a tremendous way. And I didn't know how to navigate all of that. And then fast forward, you know, because I repressed a lot of those memories of the abuse, it didn't come back to like around 12. And then when I started to remember it, I started to have nightmares, dude, reoccurring nightmares. And it was very spiritual, very demonic how all these things were coming about. And I just got so angry at God. I mean, I was like, God, how could you do this to me? Why would you allow this to happen? My mom was trying to take me to church. I was just trying to be a good Christian boy. But like, no, I had abuse marked all over my life. So at that point, I just kind of turned the corner and I said, forget it. I am not going to serve you, God. I hate you. And I just lived a life of debauchery, dude.
Yeah.
I just tried. I fell more into pornography. I started to manipulate women. I started to use women. Like that was my life. To around the age of 16. And I'm giving you all the milestones here, but like real quickly, age of 16, I just fell into so much promiscuity that I was in so much despair. And I was angry at how I have led my life. I made choices that negatively impacted me. There was abuse. There was things that happened to me, but I could have responded differently and I didn't. I went the negative route and it actually destroyed me. I had so much unforgiveness in my heart. It destroyed me to a point where I almost ended my life, dude. And I could go into that whole story if you want. You could decide which story you want to go into. But I literally was in my bed at 4:00 in the morning, getting ready to end my life. And I share this on my podcast too, this story. And God just miraculously intervened. I mean, I cannot tell you, dude, how it was like one of these moments where God, very few times in my life where I felt like God spoke to me, and he did. And I could tell you how I felt in that moment when you have a knife put in your throat because you're going to end your life. And I felt like God reminded me of Joshua 1:9, where he says, Ken, do not be discouraged, do not be dismayed, but be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And dude, it was the first moment. If you guys have ever been through suffering, and as you're listening to this, some of you may have suffered way more than I have. Or you may feel like that's not me. I've never suffered. But the reality is we all live in a fallen world. We all suffer in some form or fashion. And when you suffer, here's what I learned. You feel completely alone. You feel completely isolated. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know who to trust. You don't know who to engage with. And I just remember that moment when God came into my room and he shared this with me. I felt like for the first time, I wasn't alone in my life. Like someone was listening to all my pain and anguish. And it was hard. I mean, dude, there was hours of me just crying in my room by myself, just saying, God, why would you allow this to happen to me? And I don't know what to do. And I slowly but surely started to say, God, if this is really you and it's not just emotional things that are happening to my life, let's take my faith seriously. So then I just took the next several years of just God walking me through healing. I left New York City, moved to Texas. In Texas, I found a counselor where he started to really work with me in a lot of my issues that I had, a lot of the struggles that happened because of the abuse, and then also the sin that I committed. It was sin. The things that I did were wrong that I had to navigate. But the hardest part was that I tied both of those together. I was like, I sinned because someone did this to me. So I felt justified in doing all these other things.
Wow.
And I had to like separate those two things and realize, no, the abuse happened. I got to work through that. And I committed certain sins that now I got to repent of and I got to work through.
Oh man, this episode is looking like it's going to be a good one. And I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to interrupt you real quick for an offer that I think is going to bless your life. If you like exclusive access, if you like behind the scenes content, if you really, really, truly want to grow and you believe in the mission of Valley of the Heroic and what we're doing here, I want to invite you to join our private community on Patreon. Patreon is a really, really dope website that allows you to create exclusive content for your people. And you are my people. So listen, I'm inviting you to join. You'll get access to exclusive content. You'll get access to a private chat. You'll be able to talk to other people who think just like you and want to grow closer to God just like you. And on top of that, you allow us to continue to create this content completely for free on all the platforms that we release it on. I have so much more in the works that I'm preparing to do with Patreon, but I can't do it if nobody is in there. Right now, there's one member, and she's my mom. If you were a member before, I'm inviting you back. If you've never been a member, I want to invite you to pray. And I'm already talking too long, but I'm just really excited about what we're going to do on Patreon, and I want you to be there. So tap the link in the show notes below to join on the Patreon. Anybody who tells me that they've joined because they heard this part will get a free t-shirt. You can show it to me on Instagram. You can say it in the comments down below. You can email me, whatever. It doesn't matter. You're going to get a free t-shirt, a Valley of the Heroic t-shirt that I'm really excited to give to you guys. And we're going to jump back into the episode because I already talked too much already. All right. Love you guys. Peace, 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 peace.
So that's super quick, condensed version of all the major milestones of the shame. I'll pause there, man, because I'm sure there's several questions that you'd want to ask. But I felt like my whole first 19, 20 years of my life was just shame after shame after shame. And if you are wondering, well, what do you mean by shame? let me just give you this definition. I'll hand it over to you. Shame, I feel like, is who you think you are based off of what you might have done or how you see yourself. So for me, a lot of times we think about guilt, right? Like guilt and shame, they kind of go hand in hand when you sin. Guilt is what you've done. Shame is who you think you are based off of what you've done. And so most men, they walk around feeling shameful because they feel like they've never either they haven't achieved certain things or they haven't been able to accomplish certain things. And they feel this thing, they feel this innate ability to not reach their fullest potential. And when you have abuse that comes to you or sin that you've committed, it dampers your potential. And I had to walk through all that. I had to see myself as a shameful person. And I'll just add this last thing. One of the reasons I talk about abuse so much is because for men, it is such a vulnerable issue. And most men, we are depicted as strong. We're supposed to be these strong individuals. We are supposed to be these tough people. Nothing can hurt us. But like now I'm a little boy who's been abused and who's been hurt. How can I possibly be healed? Right? And the stats are staggering. 1 in 4 men have been abused. 1 in 3 women have been abused. So like for me to act like it's not existent out there would be crazy. I know there's a lot of men that struggle. So that's why I am like, there aren't going to be men who talk about it. At least I'm going to talk about it to be a testimony to people. And I share this in your podcast so that people hear these things to not be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in this spirit too. There's going to be hope. But these are the milestones that have affected me quite a bit and how it shaped me and how I needed to overcome shame.
Bro, I just want to thank you for the bold authenticity you clearly walk in.
Thanks, man.
Because I think that, especially as a victim of abuse at the ages 3 to 5, bro, it's incredibly difficult to recover from that. Because again, you held very little autonomy as a child at that age. You had very little control over what happened to you, over how you understood what was happening to you, over even just like your own self, right? And so for someone to take advantage of that, it's appalling, especially as a father of 2 girls who are about to be 3 and 5.
Yeah.
So I think about them and I think about how innocent they are, bro. And I'm sure that just accelerated so much of your life, which is kind of what I want to begin touching on. But I also want to say, do not be afraid of monologuing on my part. Okay, you can go as long as you want. If I want to interject, I will interject. I'm not afraid to be like, oh, bro, I have to stop you there. If you're going and I'm not saying anything, feel free to keep going. You don't have to. All right.
Perfect.
But anyway, so like I was saying, thank you. No, seriously, thank you for the boldness and sharing your story. Not everybody is able to do that, and not for a fault of their own. I think that that's the natural default response to something so appalling, is to like cave in.
Yeah, keep it to yourself.
Exactly. If you cave in, right, and maybe later on you do the work, even doing the work necessary to heal does not necessarily mean that you can go and share it with other people. So that's an extra step that you take that deserves recognition, bro. So I just want to thank you for that.
It's so hard. I mean, I talk to a lot of men who are trying to overcome their struggles, right? And it could be small things, right? And it's just for them to share it. I know a guy who right now, he's like, I just struggle with anxiety, and to even communicate how he feels, it feels so shameful because there's all these mindsets that society has told us and what we feel because of perception that we have to be a certain way. And it's like, no, man, I'm going to walk out in my vulnerability to show you like, it's okay. You know, 2 Corinthians talks about this. In our weakness, he is made strong. Like the goal of our faith is not to show you like, look how great I am. It's like, no, look how great God is. And look what he was able to do in such a broken vessel. And I mean, I was broken, man. I genuinely felt completely broken. I felt used. I was abused. Like I genuinely felt like there was nothing good in me that could ever be redeemed. I felt worthless, man. And for God to all of a sudden start to say, no, you are. And I'm going to use this. This is a famous adage, but like, I'm going to use your mess as a message or your test as a testimony, right? Like, I'm going to show you how to do that. It's going to be a long road, but watch what I can do. And my life, the reason why I don't mind sharing it, I'm very vulnerable about it, and I've gone through a lot of healing, is because I want God to get the glory from it. I didn't do it. Like, dude, there's not a lot of stuff that I did. It was like, oh yeah, I'm so great. Like, look how I picked myself up off my bootstrap. No, dude, I almost ended my life because I didn't know how to pick myself up. I sucked at picking myself up.
Wow. That's so good.
I needed God. It was only God who came in and redeemed my life, transformed it, and comforted me that I was able to start making radical change.
I think that a lot of people are actually afraid of admitting that they suck at picking things up. I've been there before. I've been there in situations where I'm like, you're literally trying to break your head to figure something out that you can't figure out within and of yourself. And it's either a matter of needing to invite God into your situation or needing to do the work necessary to be able to heal or to be able to get past that situation. And I think that a lot of people, they just stay stuck there. They're just like, I have to figure it out myself. I have to figure it out myself. I have to figure it out myself. And they're not realizing that they have not been able to figure it out, and inviting God in or inviting other people in or seeking out information, whatever it may be, is the next logical step. And it doesn't make them, especially for men like you and I, it does not make us any less strong to do so. You know, I think about the 12-year-old you who, first of all, even listening to what you were saying, like going from 12 to 16, all of the different things that you were doing, where was your heart at in that time? What was the direct response that happened after you remembered things? You alluded to anger a little bit and to some of the things that you did, but I want to just see if you can kind of dive into the mindset and heart of that time that you were experiencing, and then how God brought you to healing through that.
Yeah. So I went through several stages. I think the first stage is confusion. I was very confused as to what was happening to me, what were the memories that were coming to mind, and then the nightmares that I was having, because they were very much correlated. And I just didn't know. I mean, my mom, she came from a old school Pentecostal church. She like broke out the anointing oil every night, right? Like she was just like trying to like pray over my heart and praying over my soul, and nothing was working.
Wow.
And a big part of it was that confusion then started leading to anger. And I would say that it wasn't like the first year, like 12 or 13. I didn't really realize what had happened because there wasn't space where people were talking about this. Like my parents, bless their soul, like they're great parents, but they weren't talking to me about sexual ethics. They weren't talking to me about abuse. School, it wasn't being talked about very much. And then from Hispanic cultures too, man, like that's like, they'll never talk about
brush it under the rug.
Brush it under the rug, right? Like, and so it was so like, I felt so isolated. And it wasn't until around 13 or like I started to really acknowledge, like, I think these things really happened to me. And that's where the anger boiled up. I felt like it was a volcano, dude, where it was just like inside little by little, I was like every day getting more frustrated, getting more angry. In some ways, I was blaming my parents because I thought, well, my parents should have, protected me. And then I was like, well, these people should have protected me. So there was a lot of anger. Then the other emotion that came was fear. I actually became very afraid because I didn't know if it was going to happen again.
Wow.
And I would walk around, and I lived in a more ghetto part of New York City that I was just like even more afraid about people around me, you know? And it's interesting when people walk in fear, you could actually tell, right? That they're fearful about something. And because of that, I got bullied. I got jumped several times living in New York City. So like it just perpetuated this anger and fear. Both of those emotions were just like this cycle. And I just took my rage out on, like, to some extent, God, right? I was just like, well, God, I know you told me to not go do this, so I'm gonna go do this. Or like, I was like, he says, do not lie. Oh, well, I'm going to lie my face off.
Yeah.
I was just like going to get back at him, thinking that, in my heart that I was like, I'm going to get a one up on God. Ultimately, I was hurting myself more. So that's what was going on from like 12 to 16, where there was just so much frustration, so much anger, which turned into bitterness and resentment and this ability to really blame everyone else for everything that happened to me. And I would never take ownership of what I had done, not about the abuse. That was for sure. Someone did that. I had no power over that. I could not do anything about that. But all the things that I started to do, man, I blamed it on everyone else, And this is, if anything, where I find a lot of individuals that I have counseled through is the victim mentality that they end up having is it perpetuates everything, right? They don't take ownership of what they've caused them to what they do, either good or bad. So they always are blaming someone else. So I just had to learn from the healing perspective, and I'll start shifting and talking about that. What were the things that really were not my fault, and what were the things that were my responsibility? So when I started going to see a counselor. He had to like dissect both of those in two different ways. He couldn't like heal just one or the other, or like both at the same time. We had to work through it. So a lot of the transformation, this is what happened. If you want to know big picture, and we could dive into whichever part you want to go through. But big picture, the first thing was me actually feeling like someone was present with me in my pain. Most of the time when someone is going through suffering, they don't have anyone to walk with them. Like, think about this. The next time you share your issue or your sin or your struggle with someone, what is their natural response? Give you an answer. Well, hey man, well, just do this. Well, just go pray more. Just go do this. Go find an accountability partner. And it's like, no, actually you missed the whole point. Most people share their pain, not so that they can find a solution, so that they can feel heard.
Yeah.
So like my counselor, he just heard me for months of just like all the pain, all the stuff that I was processing through. And it was immensely helpful for me to just like say, okay, I feel heard. Once he was able to get me to feel heard, the second thing was now working through my identity. I had an awful view of who I saw myself was. You know, if I was honest, dude, I would look in front of a mirror, and in the mirror, I would just see a scared little boy all the time. And I had to learn how to reframe myself and see what God sees in me, which, interesting enough, when I started to go through this process of like figuring out who I am in Christ, I had this major barrier. And this is when it started shifting from working through the abuse to now working through the sin that I've committed. There was a lot of anger in my heart that I never dealt with. And when anger leads to bitterness, that's when the enemy has a foothold in your life. So I had to go through a whole process of forgiveness where God was little by little chipping away at me. I remember my counselor, this is a little funny story. He was like, you gotta learn how to pray and ask for forgiveness for what had happened. And this is months. I want to make sure I say this. This is months after we were working together. So it's not like the first session or anything like that.
Yeah.
Right. But he's like, you got to forgive. I'm like, what do you mean by forgive? Like, I don't get it. What do you actually mean? Because like, I used to think forgiveness was letting the person off the hook. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't want to let this person off the hook. I want God to bring judgment. Like, I read the book of Psalms, and King David is like, bring judgment on these people. Let 1,000 arrows fall on these individuals.
1,000 arrows. That's so accurate.
Like, I was like, I want to be like Elijah, like bring the bears and maul these people, right? Like, those are prayers. I'm like, I remember praying, Lord,
these are the prayers I want to pray.
Yeah, these are prayers. I used to pray certain prayers where I was like, God, I just ask you right now, as this individual is walking downtown, that a bus just hits him and someone shanks him. Like, let him feel like that's the way, bro. I was praying these like raw, angry prayers fueled with resentment.
Yeah.
God did not answer those prayers.
No.
Right?
He heard them.
He heard them, but he didn't answer those prayers.
Yeah.
But he knew it. And I remember this is what my counselor taught me. He said, forgiveness is not about letting people off the hook. It's about putting them on God's hook and making sure that you know that God is going to bring justice. And this was the hardest part for me, was that justice it's God making all things right. So it's not how I feel or what I think God is going to do or what I'm going to do. It's what God is going to do. So I just said, Lord, I had to go through this process of forgiveness of just saying, Lord, I forgive. And I trust that you are going to bring the right justice to this scenario and this situation. Not what I want. I want that person to get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, God, may have a completely different plan, and I'm open to it. And it was super difficult. But when I started to feel heard, grow in my identity, walk through forgiveness, right? All of a sudden, my heart started to melt. And I started to soften and be tender and joyful. Anger actually fuels shame, because anger many times is a defense mechanism for how you feel inside.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to let people in. You feel vulnerable. And what do? You lash out. And that's what I was doing. I was just lashing out. And I had to now take all those walls down, all the ways that I was feeling like lashing out, and saying, God, I allow you to heal my heart. And when he started doing that, all of a sudden my identity, I started to see who I really was in God. And it brought so much joy, so much happiness, so much peace. People saw a shift in me, man, where they were like, Ken was always angry. Now I'm like joking around. Now I'm laughing. Now I'm like smiling. And they're like, who is this guy? Right? Like, what happened to the angry? Like, I was cussing out a storm just if you just nudged me.
Yeah.
Bro, like, I weighed 130, 5'7", you know, I'm like, I was like a chihuahua. Like, I'm like yelling at people and they're like, who is this, kid? And it's just like, God redeemed me, man. And after the forgiveness, the biggest thing that ended up happening from there was now walking out in repentance for all the sin that I committed and finding reconciliation. I cannot tell you how many women I had to go to and ask for forgiveness the way I treated them, the way I behaved. Right. I remember this is super shameful. And I just share this because this happened. This is reality. I remember one time I was going to meet with a girl, and I felt like the Lord was like, she is made in the image of God. And I want you to preach the gospel to her. You're called to evangelize to her. And I'm like, God, I'm not coming here to evangelize. I was trying to like get me myself pleasure.
Yeah.
And God was like, nope. That's not what I want you to do. So I was like, okay, cool. I said, fuck God, I'll listen to you. I was like around 18, 19, starting trying to serve the Lord now. So I was like, okay, God, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to do this. And right when I sat down with her, I was like, hey, listen, whatever you think was going to happen here is not. I need to tell you about God. Yeah. It's not. So, and then I just started preaching the gospel to her. And then like she opened up and she's like, wow, this is amazing. This is like, no one's ever done this for me before. And I was like, God, I did what you asked me to do. I felt so great. But you know what ended up happening 10 minutes later? I started making a move on her. And little by little, it progressed to places where we didn't want it to go. And I remember leaving that place feeling the most shameful I've ever felt in a long time. Where it's like, now I was trying to be a Christian. Now I was trying to serve God. And I used the gospel for my own advantage.
Wow.
And I share that because I remember going back to the repentance and reconciliation aspect of like years later. I mean, this is now 7 years later. God was like, hey, remember that girl? I need you to ask her for forgiveness of how you treated her and how you used the word of God in that moment. And I was like, you're right. And it was at this point I was already married. So I'm like telling this to my wife and she's like, well, you got to do what the Lord's told you to do. Like, do it. And I just remember feeling this like pit in my stomach, like my life is going to be ruined. And I reached out to her and I just said, hey, I just wrote this long thing to her asking for forgiveness and how I've changed. But like, I totally understand if you don't ever want to forgive me, like I get it. And she was like, Ken, you were the first guy that has ever done anything like this. And wow. She had a bad background too. There's been a lot of guys who manipulated her. And she's like, you're the first guy that has ever come back and just apologized. And it was a beautiful moment for me to see this is how the gospel works, not in strength to strength, but in weakness. And just sharing my story and just like, Lord, like I'm broken, I messed up, but God is good. I'm not. God is good. Right. So those are like the key milestones: being heard, identity, forgiveness, repentance, reconciliation with people. And then the last one I would say is once I started doing that, all of a sudden my heart started being fueled to purpose. Where I was like, God, how do I now walk in your purposes? Most guys who struggle with, I would say, sexual addiction, if you're honest with yourself, a lot of times it's because of boredom or because of comfort. You don't feel like you have a place in life, so you run to it. And you don't feel like you have a purpose in life. But once you feel like you have a calling, dude, it's easier to fight back. You're like, I don't want to get rid of the calling that God has in my life. So you go after the things of God. You're going after the people of God. You're going after the mission of God because that's what you're propelled to do. So once I started doing those things, man, I felt like God little by little started to heal my heart, change me, transform me. And 15 years later, I've helped hundreds of men start kind of use a similar system to find that freedom and find that purpose and get to a place where they feel excited. And especially if they've had abuse in their life, to be like, man, I see my life way better than what it is.
Yeah. So 2 things, bro. First of all, I just want to highlight something. Here's my thing. I put myself in your place for a second when you were sharing your story about having to go and ask her for forgiveness.
Oh man, that was the hardest.
Yeah, no, I felt like I could see how difficult it was and how that was a very shameful thing for you. And I think that in putting myself in your spot, I know that these were what my thoughts would have been. I would have been like, maybe this is one that I leave out. Is this one that I really want to share? Those thoughts that come up and then we just push them down because we want to do things for God's glory. And I think that sometimes I'll think like, man, somebody's going to listen to this. They're going to be like, look at this guy. Who does he think he is or whatever, right? I tend to sometimes think about what people are going to think about me. And so I just want to highlight that because I think that what is so powerful about that, again, going back to the boldness to be able to say, this is what I did. You know what the thing about that is that anytime there's somebody that's throwing pebbles at you, it's always because everything that they did is still under wraps. And they 100%. They have this benefit that they hide behind that nobody knows their dirty laundry. This is why it's personally very hard, generally speaking, for me to really judge people. I have a very high threshold for just being like, I guess, like a container for people's sins, like whether it's on a public conversation or a private one. And a lot of times privately, people will say to you, like, listen, I'm sharing this with you and I'm so sorry. And I'll just be like, I'll just stop them. Like, there's probably nothing you could tell me that would surprise me, because the human condition is so crazy, erratic, and sinful. Why would we be surprised by the things that we hear people say? And in being surprised, discourage them from being able to speak their truth out loud to receive freedom. So the fact that you did freely, even though I could tell it was difficult, again, that itself speaks to me about us needing to have the courage to walk into healing, to speak out about the things that we've done wrong, because of course it's sad. Of course it's sad what she had to go through in that situation. Of course I would probably be ashamed too. Of course, there's a million stories I could tell you, bro, right now that of things that I did that were shameful, right? But at the end of the day, God brought you out of that thing. You were in a new place. You said you were married now. You're a different man. Who knows how much pain and hurt she was experiencing, and how easy it would have been for you to just be like, man, I haven't talked to her for 15 years. I'm not even going to hit her up. You know, like, we convince ourselves out of situations that God or directives that God gives us by like doing mental gymnastics for us to get out of it, right? But no, God told you to do something that was for a reason and for a purpose. He told you in the beginning to preach the gospel to her, and he told you in the end to live the gospel to her. And that's such a beautiful thing, because who knows what piece of God's story in her life that is.
Yeah. And I couldn't, like, I knew at that point, it was 7-10 years later after I reached out to her and asked for forgiveness, that like, it's not my place to start a relationship to like,
right.
Pursue the gospel. But I did my part where I said, Lord, I'm going to ask for forgiveness and let it be there, But one of the crazy things that I have found is most men, right? I love how you were talking about, there's these pebbles that people are throwing at them, right? And I have found the best way to diffuse them is just start getting it out in the open.
Yeah.
Right? Now, here's the deal. I wouldn't say go share all your stuff with everybody and anybody, right? I feel called by God to be able to share my story. And I am now at a good place enough where I share it on stages, on different platforms, that it's easy for me. It's not like it doesn't bring back all these negative emotions. I can express my emotions of how I felt. It doesn't own me,
Yeah.
But for you guys who are listening, if for some reason you're like, man, I got to get people to stop throwing pebbles at me, right? I like that analogy. Or stones, sometimes it might feel like.
Yeah.
The best way is just finding people who you can share your story with. Because here's what I found. When you can share all the shameful things about your life and someone accepts you, you feel for the first time fully known.
Yeah.
Most guys walking around right now, they don't feel fully known. So they have to have these masks on, these personas on of like, oh yeah, I'm this type of guy. I act this certain way. Like, no, man, you're a hurt little boy. Admit it. It's okay. But guess what? God can make you strong, right? But his strength is going to look very different in your life than what our society tells you. And that's what I'm always preaching to guys. Like, look, meekness is power under control. God is going to make you a humble man, but he's also going to make you a dangerous man when you fall in line in obedience to what he's asked you to, right? And the way to do that is not to like say, hey, I'm going to hide my sin. It's no, I'm going to reveal my sin to the right people, first to God, then to other people that you can trust. And when you start to do that, man, God just reveals so many beautiful things about his grace, his mercy to you. I love this verse. It says in 1 John 4:12, it says, no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, his love is made complete in us. Some of us can't fully see the love of God until we start sharing our story with one another. And that's what I want for men. And that's why I am very open. I'm like, all right, what do you want to know? Like, I'm not hiding anything. And I know it because us guys, we're so good at hiding stuff or 100%. Pitching something, right? Like we'll pitch it in such a way we're like, you know what? Well, this is actually how I felt. It's okay. It's not a big deal. No, man, if it was a big deal to you, it's a big deal. Let's walk through it.
Yeah.
Right. So, man, I love how you have opened this platform for people to just share their story and my goal would be to see men just thrive. Right? Because I don't want them stuck.
Yeah.
I don't want them stuck in their shame. I don't want them stuck in not fulfilling their God-given mission. And I know the pain that they're walking through of just like, I got to keep this to myself. So man, that's why I'm always sharing my story, because hopefully it'll get men to be like, you know what, I got to share my story too. Again, not to everyone, maybe to some trusted people. And for those who are listening to it and you're like, I don't know who to trust, man, go reach out to Eric, reach out to myself. Like, hopefully we have some trust enough that you would want to tell us your story, man. And I'd be glad to hear them.
Yeah. Bro, I'd love to just end on highlighting something that you said at the end about your process. You shared how the last step was being filled with purpose, and that was what gave you the fuel to be able to fight back. I'd love for you to kind of walk me through what you think is the difference between a man who's able to live in purpose and therefore has the strength and resilience to be able to fight back against shame and addiction to any type of sexual sin, as opposed to the man who thinks maybe he's walking in purpose, but really what he's doing is just being very busy and works really hard and maybe provides well, but is still deeply inside struggling with something. What would you think is the difference between those two different mindsets?
Yeah. So I think it's Saint Ignatius or Saint Irenaeus who said that the glory of God is man fully alive. The glory of God is man fully alive.
I love that.
So how do you know when you're fully alive? It's actually when you're walking out in your God-given purpose. Busyness and purpose are very different, because busyness is trying to distract you from what you're feeling or what you've done. Purpose is focused on impact for God. And that purpose and that impact look very different, right? So for me, it might be that I am working in the marketplace. For others, it might be being a pastor. For another person, it might be a salesman. It doesn't matter, right? Like, it's the impact that you make. Busyness, though, is like you're just trying to distract yourself from all of the pain that you might be going through, all the sin that you might have committed, right? I know so many people who are like, I need to stay busy because I'm always feeling anxious. And they're like, if I slow down, I have to feel the anxiety. And it's like, no. Actually, you have to slow down and let God do the work of whatever's going on in your life. So like slowing down is super helpful. I also found that when you're purposeful, you actually achieve more while doing less. That's where most people mess up. They feel like they always have to be grinding it out. No, you could be purposeful and really productive.
Yeah.
And that's what I do a lot in my day job now, is like helping people figure out what is your purpose? What are you supposed to be trying to be productive at? Because if you can't do those two things, you feel like you're in this hamster wheel of just burnout at some point.
Yeah.
And it gets exhausting, man.
Yeah.
So that's the way I like to think about it when men are being distracted. Here's the last thing I'll say is that if you're being distracted by busyness, when stress comes along, the way you cope if you're busy is to fall into your sexual sin. If you're purposeful, all of a sudden you feel like God's reminding you of your greater calling and you're connected with Jesus. You're being more intimate with Jesus. Purpose fuels you to the pleasures of God, and you can't mix those, right? The pleasures of God, the way I like to think about this is Psalm 16:11 says, in his presence, there's fullness of joy, right? So the presence of God fuels the pleasures of God, gives you the pleasures of God, and the pleasures of God gives you the purposes of God. So presence of God leads to pleasures of God. The pleasures of God leads to the purpose of God. When you start to do that cycle, it helps you to fight sin, versus when you're busy. Busyness is all about escape.
Yeah. Here's the mental picture I had when you were just talking right now. I pictured the man who's living in shame and sexual sin as if he were in a car driving. And that place of constantly going back to the sexual sin and to the hurts and to whatever is the self-medicating action is this highway that they're on. And in trying to make a turn to get off this highway, they're tired of being on this highway. They want to make a turn. Instead of slowing down to make the turn, they just keep speeding up, getting busier and busier and busier. If only I could just do more, I'll distract myself from this pain that I'm feeling. If only I could just do more, I won't have enough time to watch porn. If only I could just do more, I would just faster. Well, what's the bad thing about actually going really fast is that you can't make turns going at high speeds. You can't. And so in order for us to be able to get off of this highway that we're on, we have to slow down. We have to allow God into our hearts to do the work. And yeah, that means you're going to be anxious for a second. Yeah, that means that there's going to be some painful things you have to work through. But in the future, it means you can come all the way full circle to a moment like Ken alluded to earlier in the episode, where you're in a place and you look back and you say, I never thought I would be here. And that is the most beautiful thing that God could do. And the first step is choosing to slow down so you can get off the highway.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for being here for today's episode. If you want to reach out to Ken, his information is down below in the description. Ken is an awesome dude, definitely somebody that many of you should probably connect with. You can also check out his podcast, Shameless. There will be a link for that down below as well. I love you guys. Ken, anything you want to say before we leave?
Man, if you feel stuck in either abuse, I know that's a very sensitive topic, and you don't even know who to talk to, feel free to reach out to me. I can point you in the right direction. If it makes sense, I might be able to help you, but I'll point you in the right direction, help you find someone who's really good. I understand that. If you're stuck in pornography, there are people out there who can help you. I can help you. I want you to not be stuck. Most importantly, I want you to see that God is so good to you. He loves you. He adores you. And he actually wants to see you love life to the fullest. Not the way we may think loving life to the fullest looks like. He has a way better picture in mind. And he invites you into his story. And that beautiful story is the redemption of mankind. So I encourage you, when you start to do that, man, all these other things can dissipate as well.
Guys, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, the like button. You guys have an amazing week. We will see you in the next one. Be blessed. Take it easy. Peace.